guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a video on varnish, how to varnish your painting and which varnish to choose and which one's going to be best for you. So the very first thing that you want to go ahead and do is you want to make sure that you've allowed this painting to dry properly and fully. So this painting I have had sitting here for a week drying in my art studio. And that's right, a week. Even though your acrylic paint is technically dry to the touch after about 10 minutes most of the time, you want to make sure that just give it a week. I promise, just give it a week, especially if you've been doing a lot of glazes like I have with this painting. Now, I have been doing my glazes properly using a gloss glazing liquid here by Golden, but if you look closely at the bottle, you'll see that it's a slow drying extender, meaning it's going to increase the open time of the paint, making it dry, making it take longer to fully dry and cure. So I'm going to make sure that none of those glazes are going to lift back up off the canvas by allowing it to dry fully. Now this onion painting I actually did a tutorial on for my channel. I filmed it already. If it's not up already, make sure that you subscribe so that you won't miss it if you're interested, but I will also link that up in the iCards and the description box down below. And I also did this painting as part of a demonstration for the Matisse Davin acrylic structure paints. So if you're interested on more information on these acrylics and you'd like a review, I'll link that up for you guys also in case you were interested. So the very next thing that you want to make sure that you do is you want to make sure that the painting is free from dust. I just have a mop, a goat mop here, and I'm just going to dust the painting. It might sound silly, but even if it's only been a week in a perfectly clean room, dust your painting, because you never know what's on it. Definitely make sure that it's free from dust or pet hair. And I'm also going to make sure that the brush I'm using is also free from dust and pet hair, because believe it or not, your brushes, they sit around for a little while. You want to make sure that it's dry because you don't want to introduce water into the varnish, and also that you just give it a little flick and make sure that all the dust is out of there, because if there's any dust in this brush and I'm picking up my varnish, it's going to introduce that dust into the varnish. It's going to fog over. So choosing your varnish, there are different finishes. There is matte, gloss, and satin. The matte is going to be completely flat, the gloss is going to be very glossy and shiny and reflective, and the satin is somewhere in between. If you're working with an acrylic gouache or something that's already very flat and matte and you want to keep it that way, a matte varnish is great. But if you're working in realism and you want that crystal clarity and the widest range of tonal values, you're going to want to choose a gloss varnish. And I have an example for you I'm going to show you after the demonstration to show you the differences between the gloss and the satin varnish. But basically, because the satin varnish has a little bit of the mattifying agent or the powder in it, it too is going to fog over some of your darker colors. Not as much as the matte, but if you want the widest range of tonal values, you're going to want to go with the gloss. However, there's pros and cons to everything. While the gloss varnish will enrich the painting and bring out the depth and the beauty and the clarity of those glazes, it can be unpleasant from most viewing angles, so just keep that in mind. The different varnishes that you can choose are going to be removable or non-removable. Non-removable varnishes would be like your Liquitex Professional. These varnishes are archival and they do have supposedly filters in them that will protect against UVA and UVB rays. So that is really important. Helps protect against UV damage, but this is non-removable. The good thing though about that is that if you wanted to give the option for the client to then put on a removable varnish later on, like a solvent-based removable varnish, then this varnish that you're applying becomes like an isolation coat. So you still have the option to apply it later on. For removable varnishes, there are the solvent-based ones, which I don't use for health reasons. And they have water-based or waterborne removable varnishes that you mix with water. These are the ones from Golden. I have the gloss and the satin. These I will not be demonstrating today, but you mix them with water and apply them very much the same way. You can also get spray varnishes, which are better applied on paintings that have a lot of texture or an impasto finish. So this brush here is actually an oval mop brush for mixed media, but the varnish brushes that you'll often find in your art store will look very similar, and they're basically the exact same thing. It's a very soft synthetic brush, and because it's so soft, when I glide the brush across the painting, it's not going to leave brush marks or streaks or strokes like a brush with a stiffer filament would. You can also use a sponge brush, and you might hear artists recommend that, but I wouldn't. I would discourage you from that because they are a sponge, which means they hold air and they're likely going to cause your varnish to bubble. At least that's been my experience. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate for you guys how I apply this. So once I'm 100% certain that I'm working with a clean, dry, soft brush, and the painting is 100% clean, there's no dust or anything on it, I'm going to start applying the varnish. I'm going to first apply this varnish one direction, so all this landscape direction. Then after I've allowed it to dry overnight, I'll come back and apply it in the other direction. What I'm not going to do, and this is, I have to move quickly once I start, so I want to make sure I explain it clearly now. I'm going to lay down a stroke of that varnish all one direction, and I'm not going to go back into it. I'm not going to be doing a lot of this, right? Like if you were painting with paint. Just lay it down, let it go, live, and just live your life and go away. Do not, no matter, even if you missed a little spot, resist the urge. Don't go back. Just one direction, lay it down, and then work on the wet edge and come down to the next stroke. Never, under any circumstances, I repeat, do not go back, okay? Say a prayer and leave it alone, because if you come back into it, it's going to gum up. When you start overworking it, that's when it's going to fog over. And I would also advise you not to have your face too close to the painting when you're doing this, not just because you want to avoid breathing unnecessary toxic fumes, but because just breathing on it when it's still wet can cause it to fog up. I've had that experience. So I'm going to dip into my varnish. I'm not overloading this brush. I'm just getting a decent amount on there. I'm going to come in with a stroke of varnish, and I'm going to make sure I go all the way across. I do not want any little beads of varnish. If there's still varnish on this brush, I don't need to reload it, then I'm not going to. All right, and we commit to whatever happens here, okay? It's too late for turning back, too late for prayers and useless pity, okay? That's where we're at now. We do not go back, ever. And don't be too nervous. I don't want to see any bubbling. I don't want to see, I'm sometimes starting in the middle here because that way I can more evenly distribute it. Okay, but I'm not doing like a lot of windshield wiper motions. And you don't want to overload your brush because that's how you're going to get puddles and streaks. And I'm not sure what the glare is going to be like on camera because this is a gloss varnish. So likely you're seeing a lot of light reflecting off this canvas that you did not see before. And then I'm going to come in, I'm going to gently stroke the edges of the canvas because this painting I did finish all the way around on all four sides. Okay. If you overload your brush, you will absolutely notice that you'll have streaks and you'll have puddles, and you definitely you want to avoid that at all costs. So the first coat that you apply, and by the way, have water sitting next to you. Get this into water, soapy water, immediately. And this is going to be your varnish only brush now. All right, because once you've used it for varnish, it will never be the same again. Get it into soapy water immediately. And whatever your method is for cleaning your brushes, do it twice or three times. You might think this is clean. Keep going. It's not clean. Trust me. So I have some mini disposable, these are like salad dressing cups. And I'm going to put the lid back on because I don't want to waste what's in there. And I'm going to come back the next morning and apply another layer. Now they say that you can apply another coat after 3 hours. I wouldn't. I would wait overnight just to be 100% sure of what you're doing. Now bear in mind that the glossier the finish, and they make a super gloss, and for me, I don't recommend that, but if you've done something like paint pouring or abstract art, I know some people really like that very resin-like glossy finish. You can get that with the Liquitex Extra Gloss Varnish, but again, bear in mind that if you're working on a coarse textured canvas, the more gloss you add, the more noticeable the texture is going to be, and the more unpleasant it can become from most viewing angles. So you want to balance all that. The first coat is going to kind of unify the sheen of everything, but your canvas will drink it up. Your paint's going to drink that up. It won't be its full glossiness until you've applied likely about 3 coats or so. And the more coats you apply, the more layers of protection that you're going to have between the outside world and your painting. All right, so what I've done here is I just used, and this is just paper, but I've taken some spare colors that were left over on my palette so I didn't waste anything. And on one side I applied gloss varnish, and on the other side I applied satin varnish. I also used some carbon black just so that you could get an idea of the different effects between the gloss and the satin. Now, satin varnish I think has come a long way since it first came out, and I definitely think that it's a lot better than it used to be in terms of avoiding that fog effect on your darks. But you still kind of will get it, and I'll make sure I do some close-ups because it could probably be very difficult to see on camera. But when you tilt this up, the lighter colors are going to be relatively unaffected. You can get away with a satin varnish on a lighter painting. If you're working in very soft pastel tints and beautiful tones like that, I'd go with the satin. You can definitely get away with it. But on the black and the darker, richer tones, and definitely on the metallic gold, do not use satin or matte varnish on metallic gold. You're going to kill it. That you can start to get that fogged over effect because the satin does have some of that powder in it that the matte has. So for the widest range of tonal values and the richest jewel-like glazes and tones, you're going to want to go with the gloss. However, again, it's kind of like a love-hate relationship with that gloss varnish because the glare can be so unpleasant. You really have to pick just the right spot in the room to hang it when you've got that gloss varnish on there. But nothing really enhances the brilliance and the beauty and makes your acrylic painting look more like an oil painting than the gloss will. But a lot of art galleries will actually require satin because of how unpleasant the gloss can be and how difficult it can be to place it in the gallery in a way that doesn't have a glare. So there's really no perfect right or wrong choice here. It's going to be personal preference. I really like the gloss most of the time, especially if I'm working with darker tones or metallics. But whenever I can get away with that satin varnish, I'm going to go with the satin because it's just a lot nicer and easier on the eyes, I think, a lot of the time. So it's really personal preference, and it's completely and entirely up to you. But as I tilt this around, and I'll do close-ups because I think that'll make it easier to get my point across, you can see that, you know, it is a little duller. The finish is not as glossy and in your face and glaring, but it is a little bit dull. But for the most part, the lighter tones, especially those pastel tones, I mean, are pretty much unaffected by like the light purple and the cream, and even some of the mid-tones here are pretty much unaffected by that satin. And it's not too much of a compromise on the darker tones. I mean, it's not the compromise that it would be, or as blatantly obvious as it would be with the matte varnish. And you know, but that black tone is definitely a little bit, you know, dull, but it's not. Honestly, the Liquitex satin varnish is pretty good. It doesn't have as much of that fogging over effect as some other brands that I've tried. So, you know, that is what it is. But I really do like both finishes, but you have to decide for yourself which you prefer. It's personal preference. All right, and that pretty much finishes up the video. I'm not sure how true to color this is going to show up now on camera, because I have a feeling that you're just seeing blaring white down here for the napkin, and it's not solid white in person. But if you wanted to see a very accurate representation of this painting, you'd have to check out the video from it. But that pretty much wraps up the video. I hope you guys found this helpful and that you got value from the video. If you did, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe, because it really helps out my channel. If you have any questions, don't forget to leave them in the comment section down below, and I would be happy to answer them. Don't forget that while you are letting this varnish dry, you want to make sure that you're sitting this in a place where it's safe and free from dust and debris and pet hair, sticky-fingered children. Because if, let's say you have a dog that sheds a lot, or a cat, a long-haired cat, come in the room and shake their fur around and it gets stuck in it, well, now that's permanent. So you do want to make sure that you're being cautious of that. I wouldn't leave it next to a heater or an air conditioner or anything like that. And just make sure that it's in a safe place so that the dust isn't going to be falling onto it, permanently sticking to the varnish. And I'm going to allow this to dry overnight, like I said, and then I'll come back and I'll add another coat going in the other direction. I would do a minimum of 2 coats. 3 or 4 coats is really even better, and be as generous with your varnish as your pocketbook will allow, because the more layers of protection, the better. So thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.